Oh, hi guys, how are you? I'm just putting away my shades. If you recall, several videos ago, I said if I got so many likes that I would tell you my story of how Mr. Kit and I met. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Kit to Miss Kathy's Stories.
Hello, how is everybody?
So let me back up a little bit. I'm going to back up to before I met Mr. Kit. In August of 2005, a church member of mine got married to a high school friend of mine. So I got invited by the bride and the groom to go to the wedding. And I'd went and I came home and I said, Lord, could you at least let me get married at least once? I would really love to be married and just do your will. And he said, and then I heard the Lord, not in an audible voice, but he said, well, tell me what you want. Tell me what you want out of your mate. So I said, okay. So I wrote, Dear Jesus, my husband must love you first and foremost, and then he has to have brown eyes. And then, he has to have a beard and a hairy chest. Because I watched Kunta Kinte in daughter write spell in her lover's chest. And I thought, oh, when I get married, I want to do that to my husband. That was just a childish thing when because I watched Roots way back in the 80s. Not that I'm trying to tell on my age, and all that stuff. And then I wrote down some other things. And I wrote down, the 10 things. And then the Lord said, cross off brown eyes. And I thought, but Lord, and he said, cross off brown eyes. So I went, and then I crossed it off and wrote, I don't care what color eyes he has. And went on my way and went, and everything. And one day I come home and because I started praying for I've been praying for my husband since I was 13, but more directly after the wedding that I started praying more so. And I came home and evidently I missed the trash can, and here was a Kit Kat bar wrapper in on the floor. And I bent down and picked it up, and I thought, well, that'd be kind of cute if our names match, Lord. But and so I wouldn't have to change my initials because I loved Cam, and because that's my initials, KAM. And I thought, well, that would be kind of cool. But I picked up the wrapper and I threw it away and went on. And October in Michigan at Camp Asavo is the singles retreat. And I had gone every year for years, not because I wanted to go find a mate there, but because I wanted the fellowship more than anything. And that's what it came to, is I would just go there for the fellowship. Well, lo and behold, that year in October 2005, my girlfriends from college, Julie and Janella, had come to the singles retreat. And they sat with me for breakfast and lunch, and we were chit-chatting. And I think it was Friday night supper. Janella said, Kathy, I have met the perfect man for you. And I said, well, if he's so perfect, why aren't you dating him? And she said, I have. And I went, nope, I don't want your leftovers. I don't want your chopped liver. Nope, nope, nope. So you know what they did? They dropped it. They said, okay. Well, behind the scenes, behind my back, so to speak, not in a positive way or a negative way so much, is that they started chit-chatting back and forth. We got to get these two together. And Janelle kept telling Julie, I'm telling you, Kit is perfect for Kathy. He is so perfect. They would be great together. Well, December 1st, Julie called me and she said, Kathy, Janelle is down in Florida all by herself. Why don't we just go down there for Christmas and surprise her for Christmas and just spend Christmas break with her? And I thought, I can't afford. She goes, nope, no problem. I'll get the tickets for you, and then you can pay me back or whatever. La la la. I said, Jules, I can't. She goes, don't worry about it. I got the tickets. They'd already got the tickets before they even asked me, I'm sure, because they probably got a good deal on the tickets. So um, on the 20th of December, which it was the Monday before Christmas, I flew down because Jules couldn't come down till Tuesday because of her work. So I flew down on Monday, and then she picked me up Janella picked me up at the airport, and she had her 6-year-old son was with her and stuff, and so she's like, well, Julie can't come in until Tuesday. And then she said, but we have a problem. And I said, what's the matter? She said that the teacher, because they were closing the church school at the time, they had to close it down. And so the other teacher had gotten a job in Georgia. So the Georgia conference was bringing a truck driver down, and so and so. So we have to go pick up. And I said, well, I'll stay home with the boy. with her son. And she's like, no, 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 you got to go with me because I don't want Julie and I don't want to ride back with some strange guy. I'm like, okay, because it doesn't look proper, you know. So she said, I'll go get Mr. Miller. And I said, okay. So she goes to get my now husband, but she goes to pick him up and brings him. And as she's leaving the house to go pick him up, she said, don't stare at how he looks. And I'm like, I am the last person to stare at somebody and how they look because I've been stared at so many times. And so she went and got him. He come in so her and I could go to the airport. And he walked past me. I went, well, he is kind of cute. I don't see what the problem is. The only thing I noticed was that on his glasses, the earpiece was broke. And I thought, he needs some new glasses. And that's all I thought. And then we went off to the airport, picked up Jules and the truck driver gentleman. And we dropped him off at the hotel that he was staying at and stuff like that. And then we helped the other school teacher to pack up and move and stuff like that. So I was spending time with him without even knowing I was spending time with him. And then Christmas Eve came. And actually, I think wasn't it the day before Christmas Eve was the 23rd?
I think so. I'm not 100%, but I think so.
Well, anyway, yeah, I think the day before Christmas Eve came, Janelle and Julie went and got Kit and said, you have to take him for a walk while we make him a birthday cake. I'm like, there's no reason for you to go get him to make a birthday cake because he's not here. But she went and got him, and we borrowed the church's wheelchair because at the time, like I said, I didn't have my scooter chair. And so we go off and we go for a walk. And I knew that they were making a cake. And I'm just like, we're walking, and we go back around, and she's like, keep going. In other words, they weren't done with the cake. So we walked around, and we said, so how does it feel to be set up? We'll set it at the same time. And he's like, yep, we're being set up for sure. We're definitely being set up. So we went somewhere, and we found a nice little shady spot to sit down, and he sat on the grass, and of course I sit in the wheelchair. And I said, well, let's get back at him for setting us up. And I said, all you need to do is be a gentleman's gentleman, which I knew he was anyway. But I said, just be a gentleman's gentleman. Show me a little more attention. Not maul me to death kind of thing, but just show me a little bit more attention that you're showing signs of interest to me. And I said, in fact, I have something I can give you for Christmas. And he's like, well, I said, don't tell me. And he says, well, and I said, don't tell me. Pick something out for me for Christmas. Just don't tell me. I said, because I have a teenage son that I'm buying my own gift. And he said, it's, as a single parent, those single parents out there know, and as even married parents know that when a child is young, you buy the gift and you sign love son or daughter, blah, 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 until they get to be about 10, 11 when they decide to pick out their own gifts. So I said, just kind of, pick something out for me. So he's like, okay. So we went, and we did our thing. We walked, we talked. It was a nice talk. It wasn't anything over right? It wasn't, we didn't really,
just chatted about
whatever. And then we got back, and Janella took him home. Well, Christmas Eve came. The church family was getting together at the church member's house, and for a Christmas Eve, / Christmas party / potluck dinner and stuff. So after church, we all went over to this church member's house, and I'm sitting in a recliner. Well, by this time, after the meal was, sundown came, they turned on the TV, and lo and behold, it's a Barry Manilow live advertisement. So I lean in because Kit's sitting beside me, and I'm leaning into him, and I'm telling him, I said, I told him the story about how when I was little, which I'll tell that story in another video if you want to hear that story about Barry Manilow. And I never met Barry Manilow a lot yet, but when I was little, there's a reason why Barry Manilow has touched my heart, because of an 8-track play. So I'm trying not to squirrel and tell that, but I told him why Barry Manilow meant so much to me, and how my sister would push it in and plug it in for me, push the 8-track in, and I'd listen to Barry Manilow all night long. And so anyway, he's like, oh, well, bing, an idea went off in his head, unbeknownst to me. Christmas Day come, okay? And I also leaned into him, and because you could hear church member going, couldn't you? They were going, oh, they look so cute together. And I'm like, I leaned into him and I said, I'm leaving in a few days. How are you going to squash? Because they were doing that. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. So Christmas Day come, which was on a Sunday, and we all got together at Janela's house. There was Kit and I. There was, what? I want to say 15, maybe 20 of us singles got together. It was a singles.
Yeah.
It was a singles Christmas party.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Mike brought you, didn't he?
I think so, yeah.
And so because I can waddle, but I can't walk very far, unassisted. So I went in and went to the bathroom ahead of time and sat by the Christmas tree. It was a teeny tiny one, like about this big. And so I'm sitting on the couch by the Christmas tree to stay out of everybody's way, because people were coming and going and everything. And Kit walked in and he says, here, I have a gift for you. As he's walking, I have to tell this part, but another lady that was across, she lived in a trailer park. Janela lived in a trailer park and was renting a trailer. And the lady was on the other side of the trailer and went, oh no, because he's handed me this gift. And she's like, no. And she stormed out. And I'm like, I leaned in the Kit and I said, I think she was interested in you in more ways than one. And he's like, I'm not interested. He wasn't even interested in me at that time. So he hands me this gift. And when, we set it down and then it was time to open up everybody's presents, I gave him pear butter.
Pear butter, yes.
Homemade pear butter. A pint of homemade pear butter, which back in 2005, you can put that in your suitcase and bring it down on the plane. Now you can't because it's considered liquid. Oops. But anyway, that's what I gave him for the pear butter for his gift. And then I opened up the gift. It was a Barry Manilow Live LP record, vinyl record. And I'm like, oh, I was not expecting that. And the fact that he listened and he knew as soon as I told the story that he knew what he had at home. He didn't go off and buy something. He had the record at home. So I was like, oh, okay. And then later on that night, we went around and we sang Christmas carols around the trailer park. And the Lord told me, this is the man I have for you, but you have to be patient and you have to wait. And I went, pardon me, Lord, excuse me. I'm not a patient person. What are you doing? I am not a patient person. What are you doing? He goes, just trust me. And I'm like, okay, Lord. Then I went home and my son looked at me and I was by Christmas night, because of the gift and because of this Christmas caroling, we had so much fun Christmas caroling. And at least I did. I can't speak for you, but I had fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did too.
And I got home and my attitude, my face changed. My son says, Mom, if you're going to marry this guy, I want to meet him. And I'm like, whoa. There's no meeting him. We just met. Honestly, I thought I am never going to see this guy again. I mean, there's no. There's no marrying him. No, nothing. We're never going to see each other. Right. Well, on Wednesday, after I got back home, he called just to make sure that I got home. So I said, oh, yeah, but we chatted about an hour or so, and then we hung up. Well, Sabbath afternoon, after I got home and he got home from church, I called him. So we chit-chatted, and that was in January. We did January and February. My son's like, Mom, if you're going to marry this guy, I want to meet him. So I said, okay. So this was in 2006. So for spring break, I was going to go down. And because I have, like I said before, I have cerebral palsy. And because of my disability, my son got to go for almost free. It was a low cost Greyhound bus trip. And that is a whole nother story in itself. And I'm gonna skip that story to another day. Okay. I buy the tickets. They're non-refundable they were non-refundable and they had to be used at that time because I could not exchange the dates or anything. So I said, okay, and I got the tickets 2 days. Count them, 1, 2, before we left. He calls me and he says, what?
That I think the Lord wants me to be single.
And I said, excuse me. And he was quoting what?
Quoting Paul, I forget which exactly.
In John, yeah. Quoting Paul, saying Paul says because Paul says what? It's better for a man to be
married than to
be single.
Married. Depending on what you're talking about.
Well, you were quoting to me that it was better for a man to be single and to serve the Lord, etc., etc.
Right.
But 4 verses down or so in that chapter, it said if you can't be single, if you can't handle being single, it's better for a man to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do that, and he was like, "Nope, I'm going to be single. I'm going to be single for the Lord." And I said, "Fine." I went click, and I hung up the phone on him, and I went. Sent him every gift he ever. I don't think he ever sent me any gifts, but he sent me postcards and letters and stuff from January to that date and stuff because I love to get snail mail, and so I sent him the return address and everything, and I sent it to him because I know me. I'm a very forgiving person. 2 days later, I would have wrote him back and said blah 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 blah. I overreacted or tried to call him, and I sent everything off. And about 2 days, I got the day before, because I was 2 days before that. So the day that I was leaving, I was going to call him, and I called Janella to let her know that I said, Janella, I said we're getting on the Greyhound bus at this time to head down, blah blah blah. And so I told her basically the route, and she says, and by the way, don't try to contact Mr. Miller because he changed his phone number. He does not want anything to do with you. He will have no contact with you while you're down here. And I'm like, okay, alrighty then. So my son and I took our Greyhound trip. I'll have to tell that story another day, and I'll have to ask Secret Scroll if he wants to say anything about it before I do that one. And so we got down. I got down there. Never saw him. The whole week that we were there. And like I said, I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff because a whole bunch of stuff happened. Had a good time, but a frustrating time. So frustrated that I told Janella, I said, you know what? If I don't get back on the Greyhound bus, I said, I'm going over to Kitts and I'm going over to Mr. Miller's and I'm staying over there. My son and I are going to stay over there until we get on the bus. Because it was frustrating. But if you want that story, you'll have to say, story in the comments. Or say Greyhound, and then I'll tell that one in my next video. So we leave, we get home. And after that, it's my son. My son was a senior at the academy. Only by God's grace, I was able to put him through the academy. And so they said, Miss Kathy, don't worry about going to the academy to pick him up because I lived right behind the academy at that time. We'll drop him off. So I said, okay, great. So I'm waiting, watching TV, waiting for my son to get home because he'd been gone a week for the senior trip. So that Sunday, I was like, yeah. And this is in August. So, because mind you, we didn't talk from March of 2006 at that time. So we weren't even talking. And my son's senior trip was in March because that was when he became a senior because he was a junior in March and then a senior in August when school started. So he went off to the senior trip. And I'm waiting for him to get back. Well, I'm watching TV. Well, all of a sudden, I laid on the couch and I fell asleep on the couch. And then all of a sudden, the Lord said, pray for Kitten, pray for him now. And I'm like, what? And I rolled off the couch onto my knees. It is the only time that I rolled off the couch onto my knees because of my CP, I can't get up off the ground. So, but I rolled off the couch onto my knees and I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying. And I mean, I'm like tears like David's pillow, when David talks about in the Psalms where his tears are on, soaking his pillow. I'm crying and I said, Jesus, Father, God, you said I was going to marry this man. Please don't let this man die. I don't know what's going on. And I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying. And unbeknownst to me,
Well, like I said, this was August. I remember right, and it was hot. At the time lived in this little 1 bedroom apartment. It was part of a triplex house, and it's divided into 3 apartments. And the it didn't have central air; just had a little window unit, air conditioner. And so I had basically left the back door open. The screen door was closed, but the main door was open just to kind of let some air circulate in there before I, you know, turned it off and locked the door and went to bed. I was laying down on the couch, and all of a sudden I must have just about dozed off or something, and I heard this rustle of leaves at the back door, and I thought, oh, it must be a bird or something, and I just, well, might as well go ahead and close the door. So I got up, headed toward the back, and there was this guy that I did not know, never seen before, standing a couple of feet inside the doorway. So I told him to get out, and he told me to get out. And at that point, I got angry and I flipped the light switch up, and he immediately flipped it back off and punched me a few times. My glasses went flying and I fell and hit the floor. Then he pulled out a knife and, threatened me, say, you see this knife? So I stopped arguing, not surprisingly at that point. And he threw a couple of blankets or something on top of me and just told me to stay where I was. And he walked into the kitchen, looked in the fridge to find something to eat, which unfortunately for him, I didn't have anything because I hadn't been to the store that week. I think I remember he grabbed a bottle of water out of the fridge, which is about all I had at the moment. And I told him I had a little bit of cash in a paperback book on the shelf over in the corner. And so he took the book and the cash. Um, and he was there maybe 20, 25 minutes tops or something like that. And he took his knife and he cut the phone cord. I had a landline at the time. Matter of fact, it was a real old landline that somebody had left outside to go in the dumpster at work. One of the real old-fashioned heavy black ones with an actual dial phone. And I had been using that for a bit, just for fun. And he cut the cord, and then he went out the back door. And as soon as he got out the back door, of course, I got up, closed the door, and was going to call the police, but of course, I didn't have a phone all of a sudden now. So I knocked on my neighbor's door, both my neighbor's doors, and like I said, this was a little after midnight, so not surprisingly, neither one of them answered the door. And I thought about walking to the police station, which was literally only a block or two away at the time, but that was the direction he was going, and I figured, well, I don't want to run into him again on the way to the police station. So I just let it go, and then I walked out and I called them the next morning.
and but the reason I let him share that is because when God tells you to pray for somebody, you pray for them and you pray for them right then and there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the circumstances of what they're going through, but the Lord, I just in my heart felt like something was happening, and I knew that the Lord told me I was going to marry him, and we still didn't talk after that. But when I went to work, the last name kept coming across my desk, and I finally said, "Okay." So then I started praying for him. Lord, have him to have a blessed day. Watch over him. I don't remember all the little prayers. Well, in I think it was February.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was closer. It was probably April of 2007. Maybe March or April of 2000, March or April of 2007. He sends me a letter. Mind you, I didn't have his address because I sent it all back to him. He sends me a letter that said, "Hey, how are you?" And then he put in the scripture, "If you have aught with your brother," and then he put in parentheses, "or sister, before you go to the altar, you must ask them for forgiveness." And then he asked me for forgiveness, from the way he treated me, and everything. And I mean, it wasn't a very long letter. It was maybe 6, 7 lines. And so I wrote back. I said, "Yeah, I forgave you a long time ago, blah, 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 blah," whatever, because I know my letter back to him was probably 20 pages. But that's because I like to communicate and I love to write, even if you can't read a word I'm saying. But I wrote it and sent him back. And that was in probably April. And then we wrote back a couple letters in between. And um, when my son graduated in May, and then my nephews graduated out in Oregon. So we were flying. My son and I and my mom were flying out to Oregon for my nephew's graduation. My son and my nephew are 3 months apart, and so we all flew out to Oregon. Well, my son, by happenstance, happened to get the mail, and he put it in the suitcase, in the outer pocket of my suitcase, unbeknownst to me. We flew, we got out to Oregon, and I was staying in the hotel with my grandma. And so I were in the hotel, and so I was unloading and unpacking the suitcases. We were only there for 2 days, 3 days, for the graduation weekend anyway. And I was unpacking, and behold, here's this another little letter. It wasn't very long. It was, hey, it's so good to talk to you. Da, da, da. Can I call you sometime? And I have to say, I was very facetious. I simply wrote him back, sure, you can call me. My number hasn't changed. And my number is still 989-427, blah, blah, blah. Sent the letter off. I think I might have told him that I was out in Oregon, and I'd be home and by XX date or whatever. And I'm sure when he got home, he's thinking, who's writing me from Oregon? Because I sent it out from my brother's place in Oregon. And no worries. Didn't think about it. Enjoyed my weekend. Enjoyed my time with my family out there. We got home. And my sister calls. And she's like, Kathy. And I'm like, what? She's like, can you do me a favor? I said, what do you need? And she said, can you take off work and ride down to Florida with me? Because Ron got a job down in Naples, Florida. My brother-in-law did cabinetry for Aspen Dental, and this is not sponsored, just so you know, it's not sponsored. So he's like, he's got to be putting in dental offices down in Naples. I said, sure, not a problem. And got off the phone with her. And of course I was thinking, well, maybe if I get down there, maybe somehow I could see Kit, and everything, if it's the Lord's will. Not even 5 minutes after I get off the phone, he calls. You had to have been nervous.
As I recall.
Yeah, probably shaking in his boots, going, So he calls, and I'm like, hello, and he goes, hi, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. I think we talked up 4 hours. I sat at my dining room table and talked to him for 4 hours. And then just as he's getting ready to hang up, I said, by the way, I said, you're not going to believe this, but during, July 4th, my sister, around the 1st of July, my sister's planning on is moving to Naples and stuff, and I'm riding down with her to keep her company. And I could tell his voice changed. He's like, oh, can I see you? And I went, okay, sure, I hope so. I would think so. Maybe, I don't know. I said, I'm going to be in Naples. I don't know. At that point, I didn't even know how far Naples was from Lakeland, from where he lived. So I said, okay. Got off the phone, and we talked probably every night after that because he was all excited. But I have to interject. I have to pause here. So I was planning on, getting my trip to go down. I planned for a week to go down, and my sister had bought, we were driving down on the 1st. And then on the 6th, I was supposed to fly back because it was cheap. The airline was cheaper. My sister had the return air. I had a one-way ticket back. So I'm like, the rest of the June, I'm putzing around and doing everything. And we're talking every night or whatever. Well, unbeknownst to me, he's at work. And he sees the what do they call that chair?
Well, there were several paintings just to let you, I don't know if you should mention this or not, but I used to work at a retirement home.
Yeah, just don't call it the name.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention the name. And I worked in the kitchen, but sometimes we had these food carts that we'd take the breakfast and lunch down to the assisted living wing. And so every time I would go down there, of course, there's some paintings on the hallway, and there were 2 or 3 that were kind of like beach scenes. One was just an empty chair on the beach with like a palm tree next to it, and I forget what the other two were, something right offhand, but a couple of just a beach scenes anyway. And I would walk past the one with the empty chair, and it would just remind me of her, and you know, basically her sitting on the beach by herself, alone, kind of thing was kind of what it was. And there was another one in a different part of the building that had a similar thing to it. Every time I'd walk by it, it just reminded me of that.
And you said at one point the Lord told you, I don't want Kathy to be alone. Is what
Yeah.
you told. Yeah, you told me
Mm-hmm.
that the Lord told you I don't want Kathy to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened?
Oh yeah, I was in the dish room one morning, and like I said, I wasn't thinking about Kathy or marriage or women in general or anything like that. I was just kind of concentrating on doing my job, whatever I was doing that morning, chatting with a couple of the other guys there, and just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I just heard this voice in my mind. It was the Lord saying, "I want you to marry Kathy," just plain as day, and that was it. Just, I want you to marry Kathy, and I'm like,
The
the
Kathy and
Kathy
Mishy.
and Mish, the one I'm not talking to, the one I changed my number, told her I wanted to stay single to serve you. That Kathy.
And how long? How many years did you have that phone number?
If I remember right, I think it was like 23.
He changed his number that he had over 23 years, guys. So I couldn't call him and talk to him. So the Lord told him that. And then he goes to his best friend and he says, to his best friend, he says, what did you tell him? What did you say to him?
Well, I basically just was telling him what was going on, and I think the Lord is telling me that He wants me to marry you. And he thought about it, and then he said, "Well, it's not impossible, but it doesn't sound likely." And so could be a little, she could be a little off, And so I said, "Yeah, well, I've been praying about it." And then I think it was later that same week, I went to prayer meeting, and I told Pastor Brad the same thing, and he basically responded pretty much the same way my friend at work had talked to me, and my friend at work is a very devout Christian, which is why I was talking to him about it. And but anyway, talked to the pastor, and like I said, he basically said the same thing, but as we were getting ready to leave at the end of the evening, he added one thing. He said, I could be wrong, and if it is the Lord speaking to you, the feeling won't go away. It'll just get stronger.
And boy, was it stronger. Because when now fast forward, getting to July 1st, my sister and I rode down, and my sister didn't want me driving, and so she's like, "You just talk to me and tell me stories, tell me whatever, da da da." Which, as you can tell, I like to talk because my shyness issues getting the best of me. Okay, and I'm being facetious when I say that. You know, we all know Miss Kathy has a shyness. God is working on my shyness until He comes, and I'm being facetious in that I'm not. There's not a shy bone in my body, but so I was talking to her and everything and keeping her awake. We drove straight down to Naples, and we didn't stop, spend the night anywhere or nothing. I mean, and so I get down there and I stayed and helped her unpack and move, well, I did what I could do, and my sister knew I was limited. So basically, I unwrapped the dishes and set them on the counter, and then I went to this box and unwrapped everything, and so she could move them and put them away and stuff. Because I can't carry things, but I could sit in one spot and unwrap things and get things ready to go. And she come to me one day and she said, "Kathy, my kids are coming down, and this is the only weekend I'm going to have, with Ron before the kids get here, and I'd really like to have some alone time." And I said, "Well, Amy," I said, "sis, just put me on a Greyhound bus from Naples to Lakeland." "You wouldn't mind that?" I said, "No, not at all." Bada boom, bada bing. Next thing I know, I'm headed to Lakeland, and it was probably, I think it was the 4th that I got there.
It was right around then anyway.
So, I got on the Greyhound and I got off the Greyhound, and I had a look. Even back then, your cell phones, it cost you like 25 cents or 50 cents a minute. So I talked and called Brother Seeley, and I said, "Hey, I'm da da da. Can you pick me up?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "I think I mentioned, can we stop by and see Kit before I get to your place?" And he said, "Sure." So I take the bus, no problem. I'm probably chit-chatting along the way. It was it's a 3 hour drive, I think, but it was on the Greyhound. It was like
About that.
7 hours, a little bit longer. But anyway, I got there in the evening, and Mr. Seeley picked me up, and he said, "Now, Kathy," he said, "I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay, what's the bad news?" I'm thinking, he said, "Now, I want to tell you, we can't stay long to visit Kit because he's very sick. He's got a kidney stone, so we just got to go in, say hi, blah 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 blah." I said, "Okay, got it." In other words, don't sit there and talk for 6 hours. So we came in, we stopped over, and we said hi, how are you? And I looked at him. He was wearing his Hawaiian shirt, or Floridian shirt, I should say. But his face was just totally different than what I knew just by looking at him, this man was madly in love with me. And I'm like, well, crikey. It was 360 from 2005.
I think you mean 180 though.
Okay, 180. Well, correct me.
360 would be a complete circle.
Okay, well, all right, 180. Halfway. He changed.
Yes.
His emotions were changed, and his eyes were sparkling. As soon as I walked in the room, he was like, "Oh, there's Kathy," and I'm like, and I'm like, okay. And then I had stayed a few days with the Seeleys, thinking, okay, I'm going to be leaving on the 7th or the 8th or whatever. Just I was only going to be there for a couple of days, and my get on my round trip ticket. My sister calls, Kathy, and I'm like, yes. Can you do me a favor? And I'm like, what? Mind you, when I say work, I volunteer. I was a volunteer, so I didn't have a paying job, but I enjoyed my volunteering work. That he said, can you cancel your work and stay 3 weeks in Florida? And I'm like, what? Because her kids were down for 3 weeks, and they were 10 and 11 at the time, I want to say. And the airline wanted to charge them $200 to $300 per child to fly back. And they're like, you can take the kids back to Michigan, and we'll just cancel your one-way ticket, and we'll just redo the date. And I said, sure, no problem. Minding you, I didn't know where I was going to stay for 3 weeks. You can only stay at somebody's house for so long. So I called my friend Janelle, and I said, I have this issue, and can I stay with you? She's like, yeah, sure. If you don't mind watching Griffin while I'm, working and blah, blah, blah. And I said, not a problem. So I left the Seeleys and went over to Janelle's in Winter Haven and stayed there. This man was so in love with me that he took the bus from Lakeland to Winter Haven just to see me every day after he got out of work. I'm like, okay, well, maybe not every day, but
yeah, because the bus wouldn't have
ran on the weekends or whatever.
By that time of day, it would have been too late in the day.
I think you took some time off just to come see me. I know you did once.
Yeah, I may have one day, maybe I don't remember exactly, but
so anyway, we got to spend that 3 weeks together, and not doing a whole lot of anything, but just coming over, getting together, and going chit-chatting, and I was sitting out at the Seeleys, and we were swinging, and I said, Kit, and he's like, Kathy, I'm like, yeah, and he's like, and we both said at the same time,
the Lord wants you to marry
me. And I'm like, and we're like, okay, at least we're not crazy, because now, we're both, the Lord, we're both having the same sensation. Mm-hmm. Well, and then I left and went home. That was August 7th of 2006. And I went home, and we chit-chatted back and forth. He came up for my 40th birthday, and we sat there, and we played games. Christians can have just as much fun as the next person. There was no alcohol involved. We played, for my 40th birthday, I had church members come over, and my son was so bored, he went off to be somewhere else. He's like, Mom's having too much fun. And we just played games, and we played loaded questions. And one of the questions he got was, do you have a hairy chest? And he said, nope, I don't have a hairy chest. And I'm like, okay, that's on my list, Lord. I'm not marrying this guy. Nope, not doing it. I'm not doing it. So and my son wanted to go before he flew back. He flew back on Monday, and on Sunday he said, Mom, my son's big thing was, if he doesn't go fishing, you can't marry him. And I'm like, wait a minute. First off, son, I'm marrying him. You're not. But I mean, we weren't even engaged this time. We were just courting, as he would say, right?
Yeah, courting.
And so my son wanted us to go up to Mackinac and go fishing, and he wanted to leave early because he wanted to get up there before the heat of the day. So I said, okay. And because of being Christian, I couldn't stay at my house with Mr. Kit because it just didn't look proper. So I went home with some church members and stayed in their guest room, a married couple's guest room. And I was just like, I was laying in their bed going, Lord, I can't marry this man. He doesn't have a hairy chest, and that's on my list, Lord. That's on my list. And so I had finally fallen asleep because I don't think I went to bed till 4. And I woke up at 7, and we were supposed to be up and on the road by 7. So I got in my car, zipped home, and I'm like, wake up, guys, wake up. We're late. And Kid had just went to the bathroom, and he was half dressed, and he stepped out, and he didn't have a shirt on. And I'm like, you can hear the tracks. I said, you've got a hairy chest. And he's like, look. He looks down, he goes, if you call this hairy, I said, it works. And I knew right then and there, sorry,
passing traffic.
a little passing traffic there, sorry. I wish I could have paused it, sorry. But anyway, sorry about that. Beep. So anyway, he says, if you think this is hairy, I'm like, but I knew right then and there that Jesus Christ had a sense of humor. And he was just smiling up in heaven, just wait and see. So I knew I'm like, okay. But then we got dressed, we changed clothes, got our fishing stuff on, and my son he had a driver's license, and I wanted Kit to get to know my son. I wanted them to be talking, like kind of sitting. My son was driving, he was in the front seat, and I'm laying in the back seat. Or sitting in the back seat, but I ended up laying down because I was tired. I just crashed. I fell asleep. Well, my son says to Kid, he says, I know my mom well enough. If we don't stop at the rest area, it ain't going to be pretty. So we need to stop so Mom can go to the rest area. So he's like, okay. So we stopped. They went off to the guys. I went into the women's, did my thing. And for some reason, which I don't know how I could have beat them back to the car, but I got back to the car and I sat on the edge of the seat, was getting ready to swing my legs over when they came, and he kneels down and he says, can I take your shoes on and off for you? And I'm like, why? And he goes, well, it'd be more comfortable for you to sleep without your shoes on. I said, okay. So he took my shoes off. And right there I went, boop, here's my heart. And I knew right then and there he was mine. And that I could love this man and he would take care of me and he would love me unconditionally. And we went off and we went fishing and did whatever and everything like that. But I forgot to tell you before we left, some church members, very dear good church members of Mr. Kitts, and they're good friends of mine now, said, are we going to see Kathy again? Before I left in August of 2006. 7. Yeah, 2007. Sorry. And he said, yep, she's coming back in December. I knew then that the only reason I was coming back in December was because he was going to propose. So fast forward, like I said, getting back to, we did that and everything. He came up for my 40th, birthday, et cetera, and stuff. And he went back home. And December came, I got my plane ticket and came down for Christmas. And again, it was Christmas Eve. Well, I got to back up. He calls me Well, actually, he didn't call me. Janelle called me and she said, I picked out your engagement. I said, what? No. If anybody else picks it out, no. I didn't tell her that, but I'm like, oh no. And she's describing it, and she knows me pretty well. She's like, oh, it's a sapphire, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, no. So I hung up the phone and I called him, and I said, I just got off the phone with Janelle, and he's like, yeah. I said, if any other woman sees my engagement before I do, I am telling you no. And he's like,
I was a little taken aback because apparently, like I said, Janella apparently told you that she picked it out, which was not the case. I picked it out. She was helping me look for one online, but I was the one that picked it out, not her. But
because she called me, I said,
yeah,
and so I was like, and he goes, you trust me to pick it out? I said, if I can't trust you to pick out my engagement, how can I entrust you with anything else? And he's like, oh, okay. So now here it is, December of 2007. I go down, and I think I drove down that time. No, I don't know. I think I flew. I think he flew me down.
Yeah, I think so.
And because I can't remember if I was staying with Janelle or the Seeleys, but
I'm not sure.
I don't remember. But so
maybe a little both. I don't know.
Probably again, but anyway, we're at church, and we're hanging out, and we're doing things, and he comes Christmas Eve, and we're going back to the same house that we had gone to back in 2005. And as we're driving and we're turning down their road, he goes, stop here. Call Janelle and tell her I got you lost. I'm like, what? Call her and tell. He goes, just do it. So I said, okay. Janella, Kit's got me lost. She goes, well, where are you? And I said, I don't know, some store parking lot, and it says Beals, or is it Bells? And Bealls? Yeah, it's Bells. Oh, okay. Stay there, and I'm coming to get you. Click. And I'm like, I said, well, she's upset with you. And he goes, no, she's upset with you. And I'm like, no, she's going to be upset with both of us. This man decides before she gets there and says, let me get out of the car. I'm like, what do you mean you're getting out of the car? He goes, just trust me. Just trust me. Let me get out of the car. He gets out of the car and goes 4 or 5 parking spaces away from me and just stands there. She pulls in, and she says, you get in my car. Mike, take her car. Because, I did drive down because I had my car.
Yeah.
So Mike, the other church member, got in my car to take Kit to this church member's house. I'm in the car with Janella, and I'm going, because I knew I knew he had the engagement in his pocket, and I'm like, and I'm trying, and I'm like, so the whole time she's thinking I'm upset. And she goes, and she's chewing me out. If you can't marry him now, if you can't handle this decision and this, and how are you going to handle it when you get married? And blah 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 blah. And I'm like, and I'm just, so she's thinking I'm crying. We get to the church member's house that we were back in 2005, and she takes me and the women over there at the house, take me into the kitchen, and they're talking to me and telling me about life and marriage and on and on, how you have to work things out and you can't, pick and choose your battles and stuff. And the guys are doing the same thing to Kit. He finally gets up and walks over to Miss Debbie, which is her house was at, and he goes, beep, beep. And all of a sudden it changed. All of a sudden they were like, and Miss Debbie and Janella came up to me and said, okay, Kathy, you need to go sit in the recliner. The same recliner that I told him. I said, I'm leaving in a few days. How are you going to squash this? So I'm sitting there. He comes in and he kneels and he opens up the box, and paparazzi, flashlights everywhere. I mean, just cameras everywhere. He's never yet to propose to me, and we've been married 16, almost 17 years. You thinking about time he proposed, wouldn't you? So we got married in August of 2008. Best decision I've ever made. So I think this one's getting a little long. So anyway, that is our story, and that's how we met. Did you have anything else to say?
I think that pretty well covers everything. I love you.
I love you too. All right. God bless now. Bye-bye, guys. And remember, we are praying for you. All right. And if you want to hear the Greyhound story, say Greyhound, Greyhound, Greyhound. All right. Take care. God bless now. Bye-bye.